Welcome to Dreamy History. Here's what makes no sense about the Ottoman Empire. For an empire that ruled for over 100 years, a span that dwarfs the Roman Empire's western half and makes the United States look like a historical blink, it began as a political afterthought. Imagine a tiny, unassuming principality, barely a dot on the map, nestled in the chaotic backwaters of a dying empire. It was surrounded by far more powerful established rivals, Byzantine emperors clinging to their last shreds of glory, ambitious Turkic warlords, and the lingering shadow of the Mongol horde. By all accounts, this fledgling state, founded by a chieftain named Osman in the late 13th century, should have been a footnote, crushed by its neighbours or absorbed into a larger entity. Yet, it didn't just survive, it thrived, expanding into 3 continents, dictating the course of global trade, and shaping the religious and political landscape of a vast swathe of the world for 6 centuries. How did this improbable, almost impossible phenomenon occur? How did a small band of frontier warriors, at the very edge of the known world, build an empire that would become the most enduring and formidable in history? This isn't just a story of conquest. It's a profound study in resilience, adaptation, and the sheer audacity of vision. If you're enjoying this journey through history, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And I'm always curious, drop a comment letting me know what city and time zone you're watching from. There's something special about knowing this story is reaching people all over the world. Let's start with the obvious question nobody asks. Why them? Why did Osman's small principality, rather than any of the dozens of other feuding Turkish beyliks in Anatolia, rise to such unprecedented power? The answer lies in a volatile stew of geopolitical chaos, strategic ingenuity, and a dash of sheer luck. The late 13th century in Anatolia was a land of fractured loyalties and constant low-level conflict. To the west lay the Byzantine Empire, a shadow of its former self, its once mighty walls crumbling, its treasury depleted, and its court consumed by endless civil wars and dynastic squabbles. To the east, the once powerful Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, which had ruled much of Anatolia, had been shattered by the Mongol invasions of the mid-13th century. What remained were fragmented successor states, petty warlords, and the lingering oppressive hand of the Ilkhanate Mongols, who occasionally swept through to remind everyone who was truly in charge. This was the world Osman was born into, a world ripe for disruption, but also one where survival was a daily struggle. Osman Gazi, the eponymous founder of the Ottoman dynasty, was not born into royalty or vast wealth. His origins are shrouded in legend, but what we do know paints a picture of a pragmatic, charismatic leader of a semi-nomadic Turkic tribe, whose territory, was strategically located on the Byzantine frontier in northwestern Anatolia. This wasn't a disadvantage, it was their greatest asset. While other Turkic beyliks like Karamanids or Jamiyanids were locked in internecine struggle for control of the Anatolian interior, Osman and his followers, known as Ghazis, were free to focus their energies outwards against the Christian Byzantines. The term Ghazi itself is fascinating. It literally means raider or warrior for the faith. But it was far more complex than simple religious zeal. These were frontiersmen, often seeking land, plunder, and opportunity. Many non-Muslims even fought alongside them, drawn by the promise of spoils and a chance to escape Byzantine oppression. The famous dream of Osman, where a tree sprouts from his navel and its branches cover the world, is a powerful founding myth, though likely crafted centuries after his death. It solidified his legitimacy and provided a prophetic vision for his nascent state. But the reality of his early conquests was far more grounded. His first significant victory, the capture of Karakehisar in 1285, was a small but crucial step. This fortress, near Eskişehir, provided a base for further raids. Then came Bilecik, Yenişehir and other Byzantine strongholds. These were not grand sieges with massive armies, but rather a slow, methodical chipping away at Byzantine territory, often through swift raids and the strategic placement of garrisons. Osman's forces, though small, were highly mobile and motivated, contrasting sharply with the demoralized and often unreliable Byzantine mercenary forces. He offered land and spoils to those who joined him, creating a loyal following that grew with each success. This early success wasn't just about military prowess, it was about smart geopolitics and social integration. The Ottomans, unlike many of their rivals, were remarkably open. They integrated not just other Turkic tribes, but also local Byzantine populations and even renegade Christian soldiers into their ranks. This wasn't tolerance in the modern sense, but a practical recognition that a growing state needed manpower and administrative skills. Their society, though rooted in Islamic law, absorbed local customs and traditions, creating a syncretic identity that was both Turkish and Anatolian. They were not just conquerors but administrators, slowly building institutions in the wake of their military advances. This adaptability was a key differentiator. While other beyliks remained insular, the Ottomans began almost unconsciously to build a truly diverse, multi-ethnic foundation. The early Ottoman state was also incredibly nimble. Being on the frontier meant less bureaucracy and more direct, charismatic leadership. Osman and his son Orhan Gazi were not distant monarchs. They were warrior chieftains who led from the front. Orhan, who succeeded his father in 1324, continued this expansion, but also began the crucial process of formalizing the nascent state. He established a standing army, rather than relying solely on tribal levies, and issued the first Ottoman coinage. His capture of Bursa in 1326, after a long siege, was a watershed moment. Bursa, a major Byzantine city and a centre of trade, became the first true Ottoman capital. This was no longer just a warrior camp, it was a city, a symbol of permanence and growing administrative ambition. The Ottomans were transitioning from a Ghazi principality to a settled state. The next major target was Iznik, ancient Nicaea, a city of immense symbolic importance as a former Byzantine imperial capital. Its fall in 13 further solidified Ottoman prestige and control over northwestern Anatolia. But the truly game-changing moment came in 1354 when the Ottomans crossed into Europe. A devastating earthquake had severely damaged the walls of Gallipoli, a strategically vital fortress on the European side of the Dardanelles. The Byzantines, embroiled in yet another catastrophic civil war, were too weak and distracted to reclaim it. Orhan Gazi's son, Suleiman Pasha, seized the opportunity, establishing a permanent Ottoman foothold in Europe, a region they called Rumelia. This wasn't just another conquest, it was a fundamental shift. The Ottomans were no longer merely an Anatolian power, they were now a European one, with direct access to the Balkans. This seemingly small event, the opportunistic capture of a damaged fortress, opened the floodgates for decades of relentless Ottoman expansion into southeastern Europe. It was a move that would define their empire, setting them on a collision course with the Christian kingdoms of the West, and fundamentally altering the balance of power across the Mediterranean and beyond. We've seen how a small, improbable principality, born from the chaos of a dying world, managed not just to survive but to lay the groundwork for something truly monumental. From Osman's initial raids to Orhan's consolidation and the crucial leap into Europe, the Ottomans demonstrated an uncanny ability to adapt, integrate and capitalize on every opportunity. But establishing a foothold in Europe was just the beginning. The real challenge, and the true test of their emerging empire, would be to consolidate these gains and face the formidable armies that would inevitably rise to meet them. And that the story of how they truly began to build an empire is what we'll explore in the next chapter. The seizure of Gallipoli in 1354 wasn't just another conquest. It was a declaration. It wasn't merely a strategic port. It was the Ottoman Empire's first permanent, unshakable footprint on European soil, a gateway to a continent ripe for the taking. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire had served as a bulwark against Eastern incursions, but now the Ottomans had simply walked around them, establishing a beachhead that would forever alter the geopolitical map. The floodgates, as we discussed, were well and truly open. But how does a nascent power, still largely defined by its Anatolian roots, not only hold on to such a crucial, distant possession, but then use it as a springboard for an empire? This, my friends, is where the story gets truly fascinating, showcasing the Ottomans' unparalleled adaptability and strategic genius. What followed the capture of Gallipoli was a period of intense consolidation and relentless expansion, primarily under the leadership of Orhan Ghazi's son, Murad I, who ascended to the throne in 1359. Murad, a formidable warrior and shrewd administrator, inherited a burgeoning state and transformed it into a regional powerhouse. He understood that simply conquering territory was not enough. It had to be integrated, administered, and made productive. The Ottomans weren't just raiders, they were builders, and their European strategy was a testament to this duality. While the Byzantines continued their self-destructive civil wars, squabbling over the dwindling remnants of their once great empire, the Ottomans systematically began to carve out their dominion in the Balkans, a region then known as Rumelia. Their approach was starkly different from the fragmented feudal lords who had long dominated the area. Where local Christian rulers often exploited their own populations with heavy taxes and arbitrary justice, the Ottomans, surprisingly, often offered a degree of stability and even religious tolerance, especially in the early stages. They were pragmatic rulers, keen to secure new sources of revenue and manpower, and understood that a contented populace was less likely to rebel. One of Murad's most significant early moves was the capture of Adrianople, modern Edirne, in 1362. This was no minor feat. Adrianople was the second largest city in the Byzantine Empire, a vital strategic hub, and its fall sent shockwaves throughout Christendom. It meant the Ottomans had not only penetrated deep into Europe, but had also effectively bypassed Constantinople, isolating the ancient capital from its remaining European territories. Adrianople soon became the new Ottoman capital, a clear signal of their European ambitions and a practical administrative centre for their burgeoning Rumelian possessions. From this forward operating base, the Ottoman war machine could now launch campaigns with greater speed and efficiency, deep into the heart of the Balkans. But the Ottoman success wasn't solely due to their military prowess. They were masters of integration. As they conquered new lands, they didn't simply replace one ruling class with another. They implemented innovative systems that simultaneously solidified their control and fostered loyalty. The Timar system, for instance, was crucial. Conquered lands were distributed to loyal cavalrymen, sipahis, in exchange for military service, ensuring a decentralized but highly effective standing army that could be mobilized quickly. This system also provided a clear incentive for warriors to fight and a stable administrative framework for the new territories. Perhaps even more revolutionary was the development of the devshirme system and the creation of the Janissaries. Initially, the Ottomans relied on their Ghazi cavalry, but Murad recognized the need for a professional, loyal, standing infantry force. The devshirme involved the periodic levy of Christian boys from conquered territories, who were then converted to Islam, educated, and trained to serve the Sultan directly. These boys, cut off from their original families and loyal only to the Sultan, became the elite Janissary Corps, a highly disciplined, technologically advanced for its time infantry unit. This was a stroke of genius. It provided the Ottomans with a reliable, professional army while simultaneously weakening the Christian populations by removing their strongest youth and integrating them into the very fabric of the Ottoman state. It was a system that transformed potential adversaries into the empire's most devoted servants. The impact of these innovations became terrifyingly clear in 1371 at the Battle of Maritsa. A coalition of Serbian and Bulgarian lords, finally roused to action, assembled a significant force to challenge the Ottoman advance. But under the leadership of Murad's general, Lala Shahin Pasha, the Ottomans decisively crushed the Balkan alliance. This wasn't just a victory, it was a rout, a complete shattering of organised Christian resistance in the region. The Battle of Maritsa opened the floodgates further, allowing the Ottomans to sweep through Macedonia, Bulgaria, and parts of Serbia, turning many of the surviving Balkan states into vassals. The psychological impact was immense. It proved that the Ottomans were not just a nuisance, but an existential threat that could defeat combined European forces. The Byzantine Empire, meanwhile, continued its pathetic decline. Surrounded, isolated, and utterly dependent on Ottoman goodwill for its very survival, Constantinople became little more than an Ottoman protectorate, its emperors often forced to pay tribute or even accompany the Sultan on military campaigns against their own co-religionists. It's a truly humbling image, the glorious inheritor of Rome, reduced to a pawn in the game of a nomadic chieftain's descendants. As the 14th century drew to a close, Murad Fukh's reign culminated in another monumental clash, the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. Here, a formidable Serbian-led coalition, including Bosnian and other Balkan forces, made a desperate stand against the Ottoman tide. The battle was fierce, a bloody crucible that forged legends and myths that resonate in the Balkans to this day. Though Muradi himself tragically fell during or immediately after the battle, either assassinated or killed in the fighting, the Ottomans secured a decisive victory. Kosovo cemented their control over the Central Balkans, effectively ending any large-scale organised resistance and opening the path towards Hungary and further into Europe. It was a costly victory, but a victory nonetheless, securing the empire's European heartland. Murad's successor, Bayezid Firfus, immediately earned the epithet Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, for his swift and decisive actions. He moved ruthlessly to consolidate power, eliminating potential rivals and quickly asserting his authority. Bayezid was an even more aggressive expansionist than his father, pushing the Ottoman frontiers further and faster. He subjected Constantinople to a crippling siege, tightening the noose around the ancient city, and annexed virtually all of Bulgaria. The relentless Ottoman advance finally provoked a major response from Western Europe. Pope Boniface IX called for a new crusade, and a massive international army, primarily French and Hungarian knights, gathered to confront the infidel. This grand coalition, brimming with chivalric fervour and overconfidence, marched to meet Bayezid at Nicopolis in 1396. What followed was an unmitigated disaster for the Crusaders. Bayezid, employing superior tactics and discipline, utterly annihilated the European forces. Thousands of knights were killed or captured, and the flower of European chivalry was shattered. The Battle of Nicopolis was a watershed moment. It demonstrated, unequivocally, that the Ottomans were not just a regional power, but a formidable military force capable of defeating the combined might of Christian Europe. It shattered the myth of European military invincibility, and solidified the Ottoman Empire's position as the dominant power in the Balkans and a major player on the European stage. In less than a century, from a minor beylik on the Byzantine frontier, the Ottomans had transformed themselves into an empire stretching across Anatolia and deep into Europe. They had built a professional army, developed sophisticated administrative systems, and demonstrated an uncanny ability to adapt, integrate, and conquer. They had faced down fragmented rivals, absorbed new populations, and utterly humiliated the decaying remnants of older empires. But as we've seen, history is rarely a straight line of uninterrupted triumph. The very speed and scale of Bayezid's conquests would soon attract the attention of an even greater, more terrifying force from the east, threatening to unravel everything the Ottomans had so painstakingly built. The empire had risen, but could it withstand the coming storm? The Battle of Nicopolis was, for Bayezid I, the ultimate vindication. He had crushed the flower of European chivalry, cemented Ottoman dominance in the Balkans, and earned the fearsome moniker Yildirim the Thunderbolt. With Constantinople now a beleaguered island in an Ottoman sea, its fall seemed a matter of when, not if. Bayezid, emboldened and perhaps a touch arrogant, turned his formidable energies back to Anatolia, systematically absorbing the remaining Turkic beyliks that had once acknowledged the Seljuks, creating a unified Ottoman dominion stretching from the Danube to the Euphrates. The empire was stronger, more centralized, and more terrifying than ever before. But history, as we know, rarely follows a straight, predictable path. Just as the Ottomans seemed unstoppable, a new, far greater storm was brewing on the eastern horizon. For centuries the steppe had been a crucible for empires, a forge from which conquerors emerged to reshape the world. And now, from those very plains, came a figure who made even the mighty Ottomans look like a regional power. Have you ever heard of a man who conquered more land than any other ruler in history, save perhaps Alexander the Great? A man whose empire, though ephemeral, stretched from the Black Sea to Delhi, from the Mediterranean to the borders of China. His name was Timur, known to the West as Tamerlane, Timur the Lame, a brilliant, ruthless, and utterly devastating conqueror of Turco-Mongol descent. While the Ottomans were busy consolidating their hold on Anatolia and the Balkans, Timur was carving out an empire of unprecedented scale. He had sacked Delhi, razed Damascus, annihilated Baghdad, and shattered the Mamluks of Egypt and Syria. His armies were a whirlwind of destruction, his tactics a masterclass in swift, decisive brutality. He saw himself as the heir to Genghis Khan, and he was determined to restore a vast, unified Mongol-Turkic empire. He was also a patron of the arts and sciences, a man of profound contradictions, but first and foremost a conqueror. And now, this unstoppable force, this scourge of God in the eyes of many, had turned his attention west. The very Anatolian beyliks that Bayezid had so recently annexed had appealed to Timur, seeking his protection against the encroaching Ottoman power. These exiled princes, nursing grievances, became the perfect pretext for Timur to challenge the upstart sultan. Bayezid, still basking in the glow of Nicopolis, initially dismissed the threat. He sent dismissive, even insulting letters to Timur demanding fealty. This was a grave miscalculation. Timur, a man who expected nothing less than absolute submission, was not one to be trifled with. The correspondence between the two rulers escalated from diplomatic barbs to outright declarations of war, a clash of egos as much as empires. Bayezid, confident in his thunderbolt janissaries and his veteran cavalry, was ready to meet the challenge. He believed his modern, disciplined army could withstand any foe. He would soon learn just how wrong he was. the stage was set for one of the most catastrophic battles in Ottoman history, the Battle of Ankara in 1402. Timur, with an army estimated to be anywhere from 40,000 to 200,000 strong, a colossal force for the era, dwarfing Bayezid's roughly 80,000 to 100,000 men, marched into Anatolia. His strategy was brilliant and brutal. He used scorched earth tactics, poisoning wells and destroying foraging grounds, to weaken Bayezid's army even before the engagement. The Ottomans, having been lured into a forced march across parched plains, arrived at the battlefield near Ankara, exhausted and dehydrated. On July 20, 1402, the two titans clashed. Timur's army was organised into a complex array of divisions, including disciplined heavy cavalry, agile horse archers, and even war elephants, a novelty for the region. Bayezid, despite his disadvantage, initially held his ground, but then the unthinkable happened. Many of the Turkic Sipahis, cavalrymen and infantry from the recently annexed Anatolian beyliks, seeing their former leaders among Timur's ranks and perhaps swayed by promises of restored autonomy, deserted the Ottoman lines en masse. They switched sides, turning their weapons on their former commanders. This defection ripped a gaping hole in the Ottoman flank. The remaining Ottoman forces, particularly the elite Janissaries, fought with an incredible ferocity, forming a desperate defensive square around their sultan. But it was a losing battle. Timur's forces, fresh and numerically superior, encircled and overwhelmed them. The battle raged for hours, a brutal, bloody testament to the ferocity of both sides. By nightfall, the Ottoman army was shattered. Bayezid I, the fearsome thunderbolt, the conqueror of Nicopolis, was captured. Can you imagine the shock? The Sultan, the living embodiment of Ottoman power, a prisoner in the hands of a foreign conqueror. It was an unprecedented humiliation, a blow that would have utterly destroyed lesser empires. Timur paraded Bayezid in an iron cage, a gruesome trophy, before eventually allowing him some dignity. The once proud Sultan died in captivity less than a year later, his spirit broken. The Battle of Ankara plunged the nascent Ottoman Empire into a catastrophic crisis. Timur, after his victory, did not attempt to occupy Anatolia permanently. Instead, he systematically dismantled the Ottoman state, restoring the Anatolian beyliks to their former rulers, effectively erasing decades of Ottoman expansion in the region. He then marched further west, sacking the cities of Bursa, the Ottomans' first capital, and Iznik, before turning his attention back east. While Timur's empire itself would quickly fragment after his death in 1405, his impact on the Ottomans was profound and devastating. The empire, so carefully constructed over a century, was now in tatters. Its territories in Anatolia were gone, its army decimated, and its sultan dead. Worse still, Bayezid I had left behind not one but 4 sons, each vying for the vacant throne. This was the beginning of what historians call the Ottoman Interregnum, or the Ottoman Civil War, a period of 11 years, 1402 to 1413, of brutal fratricidal conflict. Imagine the chaos. 4 brothers, Suleiman, Isa, Musa and Mehmed, each controlling different fragments of the empire, each claiming legitimacy, each raising armies and fighting for survival. Suleiman held much of Rumelia, the European territories. Isa and Mehmed battled in Anatolia, and Musa eventually emerged to challenge Suleiman in Europe. It was a free-for-all, a bloody struggle for power that saw alliances shift, cities change hands, and the very existence of the Ottoman state hang by a thread. The Byzantines, ever opportunistic, seized the chance to regain some lost territories and play the brothers against each other. European powers, relieved by Timur's intervention, watched with cautious optimism, hoping the Ottomans would simply tear themselves apart. Why didn't they? Why did the Ottoman Empire, unlike so many other states shattered by Timur, not simply vanish from the pages of history? This is where we see the extraordinary resilience and the fundamental strength of the Ottoman system that Osman, Orhan and Murad had painstakingly built. Firstly, the Timur system, which tied land and military service directly to the central authority, provided a degree of stability. Even with the Sultan gone, the local Timur holders had a vested interest in maintaining order and defending their lands, as their livelihoods depended on it. Secondly, the Janissaries, the elite slave soldiers, remained a cohesive and loyal force, not to a particular prince initially, but to the idea of the Ottoman state. They were a professional army that transcended tribal or regional loyalties. Thirdly, and crucially, many of the populations in the Balkans, particularly the peasantry, had come to prefer Ottoman rule to the fragmented, often oppressive local feudal lords. The Ottomans, despite their conquests, often brought more stable administration, lower taxes, and greater religious tolerance than the Christian rulers they replaced. This meant that the European territories Rumelia remained largely intact and loyal, providing a crucial power base for one of Bayezid's sons. It was from this crucible of civil war that Mehmed, the youngest and arguably the most pragmatic of Bayezid's sons, finally emerged victorious. He was not a flashy conqueror like his father, but a shrewd politician and a patient warrior. After years of relentless campaigning, eliminating his brothers one by one, Isa, then Suleiman and finally Musa, Mehmed consolidated his power. In 1413 he finally unified the empire, earning the epithet Gelebi, meaning the gentleman or the restorer. Mehmed Fkülnut's reign, 1413 to 1421, was largely one of internal consolidation and careful diplomacy. He understood that the empire needed to heal, not expand aggressively. He focused on rebuilding the army, restoring central authority in Anatolia, and re-establishing control over the re-emerged beyliks, often through negotiation rather than outright conquest. He made peace with Venice and Byzantium, knowing the empire needed a breathing space. He was the quiet architect who painstakingly pieced together the shattered fragments of his father's empire, laying the foundations for its next great surge. When Mehmed first died, he left a revitalized, albeit still vulnerable, empire to his son, Murad II. Murad II's early reign was fraught with challenges, including another pretender to the throne supported by the Byzantines and renewed European crusades. But Murad, a formidable warrior and administrator in his own right, would not only defend the restored empire, but also push its boundaries once more. He would face down formidable coalitions at battles like Varna, 1444, and the Second Battle of Kosovo, 1448, cementing Ottoman control over the Balkans and proving that the empire had not only recovered from the devastating blow of Timur, but had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever. The storm had passed. The empire had been tested to its very core and had not broken. It had bent, yes, and nearly shattered, but the underlying structures and the fierce will of its leaders had held. The stage was now set for the next chapter of Ottoman greatness, a chapter that would bring them to the very gates of the ultimate prize, Constantinople itself. Murad II had painstakingly stitched the Ottoman Empire back together, a testament to the resilience of a state that had just stared into the abyss. He had faced down European crusades, cemented control over the Balkans, and patiently rebuilt the administrative and military apparatus that Timur had so brutally shattered. The empire was not just restored, it was in many ways stronger, more unified and more determined than ever. But even as Murad secured his borders and solidified his legacy, the greatest prize still glittered tantalizingly, a defiant jewel at the heart of the burgeoning Ottoman domain, Constantinople. For centuries the city had been a constant thorn in the Ottoman side, a symbol of a dying empire that refused to fully expire. It was a strategic anomaly, a Christian enclave surrounded by Muslim power, and its mere existence was an affront to Ottoman ambition. But Murad II, weary from decades of warfare and governance, chose a different path. In a move that shocked his court and his enemies alike, he abdicated the throne in 1444, handing the reins to his young, inexperienced son Mehmed, a mere 12 years old. Can you imagine the audacity, or perhaps the folly? This sudden shift sent tremors across Europe. A boy sultan on the Ottoman throne. This was the moment they thought to strike back. A new crusade, spearheaded by Hungarian and Polish forces, surged into the Balkans, aiming to roll back Ottoman gains. But the old lion, Murad, was not entirely gone. Recalled by his terrified viziers and perhaps realizing the gravity of his decision, he reluctantly returned to lead the Ottoman armies. At the Battle of Varna in 14, Murad inflicted a crushing defeat on the Crusaders, shattering their hopes and proving that even a retired sultan was more than a match for Europe's combined might. 4 years later, he again annihilated a Hungarian-Wallachian coalition at the Second Battle of Kosovo in 1448, decisively ending any serious European challenge to Ottoman rule in the Balkans for decades. Murad, though, had once again saved the empire, but the interlude had been instructive, particularly for his young son. Mehmed, though briefly deposed and forced to watch his father reclaim the throne, had learned invaluable lessons. He saw the dangers of underestimation, the fragility of power, and the absolute necessity of decisive leadership. When Murad II finally passed away in 1451, Mehmed, now a seasoned 19-year-old, ascended the throne for the second time. This was no longer the boy sultan. This was a young man forged in the crucible of his father's triumphs and his own early challenges, imbued with a singular, unyielding vision. And that vision was Constantinople. For over a millennium, Constantinople had stood as the impregnable capital of the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire, a bastion of Christian faith and a marvel of medieval engineering. Its massive triple walls, built by Emperor Theodosius II, had repelled countless sieges, earning it a reputation as unconquerable. But by the mid-15th century, the once glorious city was a shadow of its former self, a dilapidated metropolis with a dwindling population, its empire reduced to little more than the city walls themselves and a few scattered territories. It was an anachronism, a ghost of an empire, yet its symbolic power remained immense. For Mehmed, conquering Constantinople was not just a strategic necessity, it was a destiny, a declaration to the world that the Ottoman Empire was the true successor to Rome, a new global power. He understood that this would be no ordinary siege. This required meticulous planning, unprecedented resources, and a touch of audacious genius. Mehmed Erkan, soon to be known as Fatih, the Conqueror, began his preparations almost immediately. First, he secured his rear. Treaties were hastily signed with Venice and Hungary, buying him time and ensuring they wouldn't intervene. Then he focused on isolating the city. In 1452, with astonishing speed, he ordered the construction of a formidable fortress, Rumeli Hisar, on the European side of the Bosphorus, directly opposite an older Ottoman fortress. This massive structure, dubbed Boğazkessen, or straight cutter, by the Ottomans, effectively choked off the Bosphorus, preventing any naval aid from reaching Constantinople from the Black Sea. Any ship attempting to pass without permission would be sunk. The noose was tightening. But the real game changer, the weapon that would redefine siege warfare, was yet to come. Mehmed sought out a Hungarian cannon founder named Urban, who claimed he could cast a gun capable of breaching any wall. The Sultan, always one to recognize innovation, commissioned him to build the largest cannon the world had ever seen. The result was the Basilica, a monstrous bronze cannon over 27 feet long, capable of firing stone balls weighing upwards of 200 pounds. Imagine the sheer logistical nightmare of moving such a behemoth. It required a team of hundreds of men and 60 oxen crawling at a snail's pace, but its destructive power was undeniable. This was not just a weapon, it was a statement. Mehmed was bringing the future of warfare to the ancient walls of Constantinople. By April 1453, Mehmed's preparations were complete. A massive Ottoman army, estimated at 80,000 to 100,000 regular troops, augmented by tens of thousands of irregulars and Bashi bazooks, descended upon the city. Alongside them marched a fleet of over 100 ships, ready to blockade the seawalls. Facing this overwhelming force was a mere 7,000 to 10,000 defenders, a mix of Byzantines, Venetian, and Genoese mercenaries, led by the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos. Despite the odds, Constantine was resolute, determined to die defending the city that had been the heart of his empire for so long. The siege commenced with a terrifying intensity. The colossal cannons, including Urban's Basilica, began their relentless bombardment, shaking the very foundations of the ancient walls. Day after day, massive stone balls slammed into the Theodosian walls, gradually pulverizing sections that had stood for 1,000 years. The Byzantines, though outnumbered, fought with desperate courage, repairing breaches by night and repelling assaults by day. They dug counter-tunnels against Ottoman sappers and defended the seawalls against naval attacks. However, one critical defense remained intact. The massive chain stretched across the mouth of the Golden Horn. This chain prevented the Ottoman fleet from entering the harbour, protecting the city's northern flank and allowing Venetian and Genoese ships to resupply the defenders. It was a seemingly insurmountable obstacle, a strategic stalemate. But Mehmed II was not one to be deterred by conventional wisdom. In one of the most brilliant and audacious feats of military engineering in history, Mehmed conceived an unthinkable plan. If his ships couldn't sail into the Golden Horn, he would simply move them overland. Under the cover of darkness, Ottoman engineers laid down a path of greased logs over a 2-mile stretch of hills behind the Genoese colony of Colata, which technically remained neutral in the conflict. On the morning of April 2nd, 1453, the stunned defenders of Constantinople awoke to an impossible sight. The Ottoman fleet, sails unfurled, gliding over land into the Golden Horn. Imagine the psychological blow, the sheer disbelief and terror. This single act of genius effectively bypassed the chain, divided the Byzantine defences, and opened a new, vulnerable front for the Ottomans. With the Golden Horn secured, the siege intensified. The bombardments continued, creating more and more breaches in the Theodosian walls. Mehmed launched wave after wave of assaults, using his irregulars to exhaust the defenders before sending in his elite Janissaries. The Byzantines, their numbers dwindling, their morale stretched thin, fought valiantly, but they were simply too few against such overwhelming force and relentless pressure. Finally, in the early hours of May 29, 1453, Mehmed ordered the final decisive assault. Under the full moon, Ottoman troops swarmed the walls from every direction. The defenders, exhausted and spread thin, could not hold. A critical breach in the wall near the Kirkeporta gate was exploited, and the Janissaries poured into the city. Emperor Constantine XI, refusing to flee, reportedly cast off his imperial regalia and led a final desperate charge, dying in battle like a true Roman emperor. By mid-morning the city had fallen. The last vestige of the Roman Empire, which had endured for over 100 years since the fall of the Western Empire, was no more. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople sent shockwaves across Europe, marking the definitive end of the Middle Ages and the true dawn of a new era. Mehmed the young sultan, rode triumphantly into the city, making his way to the Hagia Sophia, the magnificent cathedral that had stood as a symbol of Eastern Christianity for nearly 1,000 years. There he dismounted, ordered an imam to ascend the pulpit, and offered prayers, symbolically converting the grand edifice into a mosque. Constantinople was immediately declared the new capital of the Ottoman Empire, and its name gradually transitioned to Istanbul. The fall of Constantinople was more than just a military victory. It was a profound historical turning point. It solidified the Ottoman Empire's status as a dominant world power, giving it an unparalleled strategic position bridging Europe and Asia. For the Ottomans, it was the fulfillment of a long-held prophecy and the ultimate validation of their imperial destiny. For the world, it signified the definitive end of an ancient era, and the terrifying, awe-inspiring rise of an empire that was now poised to expand its reach and influence across 3 continents for centuries to come. The improbable principality had become an undeniable empire, and its heart now beat in the very city that had once defied it for so long. The dust of conquest had barely settled, the fires of battle still smouldering in the city's nooks, but for Mehmed II, the fall of Constantinople was not an end, but a beginning. He had taken the ultimate prize, the fabled red apple of Ottoman ambition, but now the real work began. How do you transform a conquered, traumatized city, a husk of its former glory, into the vibrant, beating heart of a burgeoning empire? And how do you consolidate an empire that now spanned 2 continents and claimed the legacy of Rome? Mehmed, now officially Fatih the Conqueror, wasted no time. His first decree was one of both pragmatism and propaganda. The city needed people. Many residents had fed, died, or been enslaved. He offered guarantees of safety, property rights, and religious freedom to those who had left, urging them to return. From across his vast domains, he ordered the resettlement of thousands, Turks, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, creating a vibrant, multi-ethnic tapestry that would define Istanbul for centuries. This wasn't just about numbers, it was about injecting new life, new skills, and new loyalties into his capital. He understood the power of symbolism. The Hagia Sophia, that magnificent basilica, was swiftly converted into a mosque, its mosaics plastered over, minarets rising majestically from its ancient walls. But crucially, he also ensured the survival of the Greek Orthodox Church. He appointed Gennadius Scholarius, a respected Orthodox scholar, as patriarch, granting him significant autonomy over the Christian community, effectively establishing the millet system, a framework that allowed non-Muslim religious communities to govern themselves under Ottoman rule. This wasn't altruism, it was brilliant statecraft. It pacified the vast Christian populations now under his sway, demonstrating tolerance while maintaining ultimate imperial control. It was a stark contrast to the religious purges often seen in other empires of the era, and it cemented the loyalty of many who might otherwise have rebelled. But Istanbul needed more than just people and religious tolerance. It needed infrastructure, a physical manifestation of its new imperial status. Mehmed launched an ambitious building program. Mosques, markets, bathhouses, and fountains rose from the ashes. He commissioned the construction of the Grand Bazaar, a sprawling complex that would become the commercial heart of the city and a nexus of global trade. Most significantly, he began the construction of the Topkapi Palace, a magnificent complex of courtyards, pavilions, and gardens that would serve as the residence of the sultans and the administrative capital of the empire for nearly 400 years. This wasn't merely a palace, it was a self-contained city within a city, a testament to Ottoman power and a symbol of the sultan's absolute authority. Mehmed's vision extended far beyond the walls of his new capital. He saw himself not merely as a Turkish sultan, but as the inheritor of the Roman Empire, a Caesar of the two lands and the two seas. This wasn't idle boasting. It shaped his foreign policy and his internal reforms. He was an intellectual, fluent in several languages, deeply interested in philosophy, science, and the arts. He collected books and scholars, bringing together minds from East and West, fostering an environment of learning that paralleled the European Renaissance. This wasn't just a military genius. This was a polymath who understood that true empire required more than just conquest. It demanded culture, administration, and a unified legal framework. To that end, Mehmed embarked on a monumental task of codification. He issued the Kanun of Mehmed II, a comprehensive legal code that formalized many aspects of Ottoman governance, from state ceremonies and the hierarchy of officials to criminal law and land tenure. It even outlined the controversial but pragmatic practice of fratricide for newly enthroned sultans, a brutal measure intended to prevent the devastating civil wars that had plagued the empire during the interregnum. This wasn't a system built on whim. It was a meticulously crafted legal framework designed to centralize power, standardize administration, and ensure the stability of the burgeoning empire. With Istanbul secured and his administrative foundations laid, Mehmed turned his attention to the ongoing expansion and consolidation of his vast domains. The fall of Constantinople had sent shockwaves across Europe, but it also signalled the final collapse of any significant Byzantine resistance. The remnants of Byzantine rule, particularly the despotate of Murrea in the Peloponnese, were swiftly absorbed. By 1460, the last scraps of this ancient empire were gone, its legacy fully claimed by the Ottomans. But the Balkans remained a volatile stew of independent principalities and defiant resistance. Serbia, though weakened, still stood. Mehmed launched a series of campaigns, systematically bringing the region under Ottoman control. While he famously failed to take the fortress of Belgrade in 1456, a pivotal Christian victory led by Janos Hunyadi, he eventually chipped away at Serbian independence, finally annexing most of it by the 1460s. Bosnia, strategically positioned in a hotbed of heterodox Christian sects, also fell to Ottoman might in 1463, its king executed, its lands transformed into an Ottoman province. Then there was Albania. For over 2 decades, a formidable figure named Skanderbeg, a former Ottoman hostage trained in their military methods, led a fierce and often successful resistance against the empire. His guerrilla tactics and unwavering resolve made him a legendary figure, frustrating Mehmed's attempts to fully subdue the mountainous region. Skanderbeg became a symbol of Christian defiance, receiving aid from Venice and the papacy. Yet even with such a tenacious adversary, the inexorable Ottoman advance continued. After Skanderbeg's death in 1468, Albanian resistance gradually crumbled and the region was fully integrated into the empire. While Europe watched in horror, Mehmed was equally focused on Anatolia. The victory at Ankara in 1402 had shattered Ottoman control over the various Turkmen beyliks, and though Mehmed Fıhfır and Murad Sen had painstakingly reasserted authority, some independent pockets remained. The Karamanids, a powerful rival principality in central Anatolia, were a constant thorn in the Ottoman side, often allying with European powers against Istanbul. Mehmed systematically dismantled their power, absorbing their territories and integrating their populations into the empire. In 1461, he also brought an end to the venerable empire of Trebizond, the last independent Greek state in Anatolia. Perched on the Black Sea coast, another echo of Byzantine glory extinguished. This relentless expansion on land necessitated a profound shift in Ottoman strategy, the development of a powerful navy. For decades, the Ottomans had been primarily a land-based power, relying on their formidable cavalry and Janissary infantry. But with control of Constantinople and a growing empire that bordered the Aegean, Black and Mediterranean seas, naval dominance became crucial. Mehmed invested heavily in shipbuilding, creating a fleet capable of challenging the established maritime powers, particularly Venice. This new naval strength allowed him to project power across the seas, securing trade routes, raiding enemy coasts, and facilitating further conquests, such as the capture of strategic islands in the Aegean. He even launched an audacious, though ultimately unsuccessful, siege of Rhodes in 1480, aiming to dislodge the Knights Hospitaller, a Christian military order that served as a persistent thorn in the empire's side. Though Rhodes held, the attempt itself showcased the reach of Mehmed's ambition. Under Mehmed II, the devshirme system, which recruited Christian boys, converted them to Islam, and trained them for state service, reached its zenith. It provided a steady stream of loyal, highly educated administrators and elite soldiers, the Janissaries, who owed their allegiance directly to the Sultan. This system effectively counterbalanced the power of the traditional Turkish aristocracy, ensuring that the Sultan's authority remained absolute. The Divan, the imperial council, became a highly structured body, with the Grand Vizier often a product of the devshirme system, emerging as the Sultan's chief minister, wielding immense power but always accountable to the Sultan. Mehmed II's reign, spanning 3 decades, was a period of breathtaking transformation. He inherited a powerful state, but he left behind a true empire, an empire with a magnificent capital, a unified legal system, a professional bureaucracy, and a military machine that was the envy and terror of the world. He was a ruthless conqueror, yes, but also a visionary statesman, an intellectual, and an architect of empire. He had taken a regional power and through sheer force of will, strategic brilliance, and administrative genius, forged a global superpower that would dominate the Eastern Mediterranean, the Balkans and Anatolia for centuries to come. The question was no longer if the Ottomans would rule, but how far they would extend their formidable reach. The foundations were laid, the blueprint drawn, and the stage set for an era of unprecedented Ottoman might. The dust of Constantinople's fall had barely settled, but for Mehmed II, the conquest of the ancient city wasn't an end, but a spectacular beginning. It was the keystone, yes, but the arch of his imperial vision stretched far wider. He'd unified the disparate lands of Anatolia and the Balkans under a single formidable banner, transforming the Ottoman state into a true empire that straddled continents. With Istanbul as its beating heart, the stage was set for an era of unprecedented power and influence. But history, as we know, rarely follows a straight line. Even the most brilliant reigns are followed by new challenges, new leaders, and often new directions. The sheer dynamism of the Ottoman ascent, however, was far from exhausted. What followed Mehmed the Conqueror was not a period of decline, but a continuation of expansion, consolidation, and a dramatic reorientation that would redefine the empire's identity and global standing. Mehmed II's death in 1481 left a vast, well-oiled machine, but also a formidable legacy for his successors to manage. His son Bayezid I inherited a state that was undoubtedly a superpower, yet one still grappling with the sheer speed of its own growth. Bayezid, often dubbed the Just or the Pious, was a different breed of sultan than his fiery father. Where Mehmed was the audacious conqueror, Bayezid was the meticulous administrator, the scholar, the patron of arts and architecture. He understood that an empire built on relentless conquest needed periods of consolidation, of internal refinement to truly endure. His reign began, however, not with grand campaigns, but with a bitter fraternal struggle that threatened to unravel the empire from within. His younger brother, Cem Sultan, a charismatic and ambitious prince, challenged Bayezid for the throne, plunging the nascent superpower into a civil war reminiscent of the interregnum. This wasn't merely a family squabble, it was a desperate power play for the ultimate prize, one that saw Cem flee to the Mamluks, then to the Knights Hospitaller on Rhodes, and finally into the clutches of the Pope and various European powers. For over a decade, Cem Sultan became a political pawn, a constant threat of a rival claimant that forced Bayezid into a cautious foreign policy, often paying vast sums to keep his brother a prisoner in Europe rather than a free agent. This saga highlights a brutal reality of Ottoman succession. The victor took all and often the lives of his siblings. It was a harsh tradition, but one designed to prevent the very civil wars that had nearly destroyed the empire after Ankara. Despite this internal distraction, Bayezid was far from idle. He focused on strengthening the navy, a critical necessity for an empire increasingly reliant on control of the Mediterranean and Black Seas. He refined the administrative structures that Mehmed had put in place, ensuring efficient tax collection and judicial fairness. Under his patronage, Istanbul blossomed further as a centre of Islamic learning and culture, attracting scholars and artists from across the Islamic world. The city's libraries swelled, its mosques and madrasas, religious schools, became renowned, and the arts, particularly calligraphy and miniature painting, reached new heights. Yet beyond the Mediterranean and the Balkans, new storm clouds were gathering on the eastern horizon. The late 15th and early 16th centuries witnessed the rise of a formidable new power in Persia, the Safavid Empire under Shah Ismail Fawaz. The Safavids were not just another rival state, they represented a potent ideological challenge. They were fervent adherents of Twelver Shi'ism, a branch of Islam distinct from the Sunni orthodoxy embraced by the Ottomans. Shah Ismail proclaimed himself the Mahdi, a messianic figure, and aggressively sought to convert the predominantly Sunni populations of Persia and eastern Anatolia. This sectarian divide, combined with territorial ambitions, ignited a rivalry that would define Ottoman foreign policy for centuries. Bayezid, cautious by nature, tried to manage this emerging threat through diplomacy and limited engagements, but the tension was palpable. The Safavid influence was seeping into Ottoman Anatolia, stirring dissent among Turkoman tribes who harboured Shiite sympathies. This simmering conflict, a volatile stew of religious fervour and geopolitical ambition, would ultimately demand a more decisive hand. That hand belonged to Selim I, Bayezid's son. Unlike his father, Selim was not known for his piety or his scholarly pursuits. He was a man of action, stern, ruthless, and utterly pragmatic, earning him the epithet Yavuz, the grim or the resolute. He believed his father's cautious approach was leaving the empire vulnerable, particularly to the Safavid threat. In a dramatic and bloody coup, Selim deposed his father in 1512, ensuring his own ascension through the tragic but customary elimination of his brothers and nephews, a stark reminder of the brutal cost of imperial power. Selim's reign, though remarkably short, 1512 to 1520, would prove to be one of the most transformative in Ottoman history. He immediately turned his gaze eastward, recognizing the Safavid challenge as an existential threat. The stage was set for a monumental clash between the two great Islamic empires. In 1514, at the Battle of Chaldiran, Selim's Janissaries, armed with superior firearms and artillery, decisively routed Shah Ismail's cavalry. It was a victory that underscored the Ottomans' military technological advantage and cemented their control over eastern Anatolia, pushing the Safavid frontier back. Chaldiran was a strategic triumph, but more profoundly, it was a symbolic declaration of Ottoman Sunni supremacy over the Shiite challenge. Having secured his eastern flank, Selim wasted no time. His sights now turned south to the ancient and immensely wealthy Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt and Syria. For centuries, the Mamluks had been formidable protectors of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and controllers of the lucrative spice trade routes. Their empire was vast, stretching from Syria through Egypt and into the Hijaz. However, by the early 16th century, the Mamluk military, still largely reliant on cavalry and traditional tactics, was technologically outmatched by the gunpowder-fueled Ottoman war machine. In 1516, Selim led his forces into Syria, clashing with the Mamluks at the Battle of Majd-Dabik. The result was a devastating Ottoman victory. The Mamluk Sultan Kansuh al-Ghauri was killed, and Syria quickly fell under Ottoman control. But Selim was not content. He pressed on, marching his army across the Sinai Desert, a feat of logistics and endurance in itself. In January 1517, outside Cairo, the decisive Battle of Ridaniya sealed the Mamluks' fate. Their last sultan, Tuman Bey, was captured and executed, and Egypt, along with the sacred cities of Mecca and Medina, became part of the Ottoman Empire. This was an expansion of truly breathtaking proportions. In just 2 years, Selim had nearly doubled the size of the Ottoman Empire, adding the rich provinces of Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and the Hijaz. More than mere territory, this conquest brought immense wealth into the Ottoman coffers, particularly from Egypt's fertile Nile Valley and the lucrative Red Sea trade. Crucially, it also brought the holy cities of Islam under Ottoman protection, elevating the Sultan's prestige to an unprecedented level within the Muslim world. With the Mamluk Sultanate dissolved, the last Abbasid caliph, who had resided in Cairo as a spiritual figurehead under Mamluk protection, formally transferred his title and authority to Selim Furthus. This act, whether symbolic or historically debated, cemented the Ottoman Sultan's claim to the caliphate, transforming him from a powerful emperor into the spiritual leader of the Sunni Muslim world. The Ottoman Empire was no longer merely a European and Anatolian power. It was now the undisputed hegemon of the Middle East, the guardian of Islam's holiest sites, and the inheritor of a legacy stretching back to the Prophet Muhammad himself. This shift in identity was profound, imbuing the Ottoman state with the new layer of religious legitimacy and global responsibility. Selim I, the Grim, had not only secured the empire's eastern and southern borders, but he had also fundamentally reshaped its character. He had inherited an empire perfected by his father Bayezid and grandfather Mehmed, but he'd expanded it into a truly global Islamic superpower, positioning it as the undisputed leader of the Sunni world. His brutal efficiency and strategic genius had paved the way for the empire's golden age. When Selim Fürse died unexpectedly in 1520, after a mere 8 years on the throne, he left behind an empire of unparalleled might and immense potential. It was an empire whose treasury was overflowing, whose military was at the peak of its power, and whose prestige had never been higher. The foundations laid by Osman, the consolidation by Orhan, the triumph over chaos by Mehmed Çelebi, the unwavering resolve of Murad Sengd, and the visionary conquest of Mehmed the Conqueror had culminated in this moment. Selim I had then taken that powerful engine and directed it, with ruthless precision, to absorb the heartlands of the Islamic world. The man who inherited this magnificent, formidable, and newly defined empire was his only son, Suleiman. At 26 years old, Suleiman was about to ascend to the throne of the greatest power in the world. He was young, well-educated, and eager to prove himself. The stage was set for a reign that would not only maintain but elevate the Ottoman Empire to its absolute zenith, an era of conquest, law, and culture that would forever be known as the age of Suleiman the Magnificent. The empire had weathered every storm, defied every expectation, and now, under its newest and perhaps greatest sultan, it stood poised on the precipice of its most glorious chapter. What would this young, ambitious ruler do with such an inheritance? The world was about to find out. If Selim Fürse was the grim architect who laid the foundations of a truly global empire, then his son Suleiman was destined to be its magnificent crowning glory. Imagine for a moment the weight of expectation on a 26-year-old's shoulders. He inherited an empire that stretched from the Danube to the Nile, from the Euphrates to the Atlas Mountains. It was rich beyond measure, militarily peerless, and ideologically solidified as the undisputed champion of Sunni Islam. But an empire of this scale is a beast that demands constant taming, a vast machine requiring meticulous calibration. How would this young, seemingly mild-mannered man, known more for his intellectual pursuits and poetic inclinations than for martial ferocity, manage such a formidable inheritance? Suleiman, who would be known to the West as the Magnificent, and to his own people as Kanuni, the lawgiver, ascended the throne in 1520 with a quiet authority that belied his youth. His immediate challenge wasn't some distant foreign power, but the internal tremors of a recently expanded realm. The Mamluk territories, fresh from Selim's conquest, were restless. Jamberdi al-Ghazali, the former Mamluk governor of Syria, saw Selim's death as an opportunity, declaring himself Sultan. Simultaneously, Ahmed Pasha, the Ottoman governor of Egypt, harboured similar ambitions. Suleiman's response was swift and decisive. His Grand Vizier, Piri Mehmed Pasha, crushed Janberdi's rebellion with brutal efficiency in 1521, securing Syria. Ahmed Pasha, more cunning, tried to play a longer game, but his treachery was uncovered, and he too met a swift end. These early, firm actions sent an unambiguous message. The new sultan was no pushover. He was a man of steel beneath a cultured exterior, ready to defend his inheritance with an iron fist. With his immediate internal challenges quelled, Suleiman turned his gaze outwards. His father and grandfather had relentlessly pushed the boundaries, and Suleiman was not one to break tradition. His first major campaign targeted Belgrade, the formidable Hungarian fortress that had for decades stood as the gateway to Europe. Generations of Ottoman sultans had battered against its walls, always to be repulsed. Its strategic importance was immense, controlling the confluence of the Sava and Danube rivers, a choke point for trade and a launching pad for further European expansion. In 1521, Suleiman personally led a massive army to its gates. The siege was arduous, but the Ottomans, employing their superior artillery and engineering, systematically reduced the city's defences. After a fierce struggle, Belgrade fell. Its capture not only removed a persistent obstacle but also sent a shiver of dread through Central Europe. The path to Hungary and beyond was now wide open. But Suleiman's ambitions weren't confined to the European mainland. The Mediterranean, a vital artery for trade and a strategic battleground, also demanded his attention. For over 2 centuries, the Knights Hospitaller of St. John had held the island of Rhodes, a heavily fortified bastion that served as a constant irritant to Ottoman shipping and a base for piracy against Muslim pilgrims and merchants. It was a Christian thorn embedded deep within the Ottoman sphere of influence. In 1522, Suleiman, again leading his forces, launched one of the most epic sieges of the era. For 6 grueling months, the knights, outnumbered but fiercely determined, resisted with incredible tenacity. The Ottomans, deploying their massive cannons and relentless Janissary assaults, suffered heavy casualties. Yet Suleiman's resolve was unyielding. Eventually, recognizing the futility of further resistance, the knights negotiated a surrender, allowed to leave with their lives and possessions. They would later relocate to Malta, but their expulsion from Rhodes secured the eastern Mediterranean for the Ottomans, opening vital trade routes and solidifying their naval dominance. With Belgrade and Rhodes secured, Suleiman had demonstrated his military prowess, but the true test of his reign, and the event that would forever alter the balance of power in Central Europe, was yet to come: the confrontation with Hungary. The Kingdom of Hungary, led by the young and inexperienced King Louis II, was a fractured realm, plagued by internal divisions between its nobility and its peasantry, and unable to mount a unified defence against the gathering storm. The Ottoman conquest of Belgrade had left Hungary exposed, its southern defences shattered. Diplomatic exchanges quickly deteriorated, culminating in a declaration of war. In the summer of 1526, Suleiman again marched west, leading an army estimated at 100,000 men, equipped with a formidable array of artillery. King Louis II, against the advice of his more cautious commanders, decided to meet the Ottomans in open battle, hoping for a decisive victory that would galvanize Christendom. The 2 armies converged on the plains of Mohacs. What followed was not a battle, but a slaughter. The Ottoman forces, expertly deployed with their Janissaries forming an impenetrable infantry screen supported by devastating artillery fire, utterly annihilated the Hungarian army in less than 2 hours. King Louis II himself perished in the rout, drowning in a marsh while attempting to flee. The Battle of Mohacs was a cataclysm for Hungary, effectively ending its independent kingdom and opening the floodgates for Ottoman expansion into Central Europe. It was a victory so complete, so devastating, that it sent shockwaves across the entire continent, signalling the direct confrontation between the Ottoman Empire and the powerful Habsburg dynasty, who now inherited the remnants of the Hungarian crown. But Suleiman's legacy wasn't forged solely on the battlefield. While his military campaigns were undeniably spectacular, his lasting impact on the empire was perhaps even more profound in the realm of administration and law. It's why his own people called him Kanuni, the lawgiver. Suleiman understood that a vast, diverse empire rapidly expanding and incorporating myriad cultures and legal traditions needed a coherent, standardized legal framework to ensure stability, justice, and efficient governance. He embarked on an ambitious project of codifying Ottoman law, harmonizing the sacred Islamic law, Sharia, with the secular imperial decrees, Kanun. Under Suleiman's direction, a comprehensive legal code, the Kanunname, was developed. This wasn't just a collection of laws. It was a sophisticated system that addressed everything from land tenure and taxation to criminal justice and the administration of the timar system. It sought to eliminate corruption, ensure fairness for all subjects regardless of religion, and streamline the imperial bureaucracy. This legal framework provided the backbone for the empire's governance for centuries, establishing precedents and procedures that brought order and predictability to a realm that could easily have descended into chaos. You see, Suleiman understood that true power wasn't just about conquering territories, it was about effectively governing them, ensuring the well-being and loyalty of their diverse populations. This commitment to justice and good governance was a cornerstone of his reign, making the Ottoman Empire a place where, for many, justice was more accessible and reliable than in some parts of contemporary Europe. Yet the drumbeat of war was never far off. The stunning victory at Mohacs had dismantled Hungary, but it also brought the Ottomans face to face with the formidable Habsburgs, who now claimed the Hungarian throne through marriage. The stage was set for the ultimate confrontation, Vienna. In 1529, Suleiman, emboldened by his recent triumphs and aiming to deliver a decisive blow to Habsburg power, launched his most ambitious campaign yet, the siege of the imperial capital itself. The march to Vienna was a logistical nightmare. It was late in the season, and torrential rains turned the roads into rivers of mud, slowing the massive Ottoman army to a crawl. Heavy siege artillery, crucial for breaching Vienna's formidable walls, had to be abandoned along the way. Despite these incredible challenges, the Ottomans reached Vienna's gates. The city, however, was well defended, its garrison determined, and its walls stronger than anticipated. The siege was fierce, with the Ottomans launching repeated assaults, employing mines and tunnels, while the defenders responded with equal ferocity. But the combination of the late season, the lack of heavy siege guns, and the logistical strain of supplying such a vast army so far from home began to take its toll. As winter approached, Suleiman made the pragmatic decision to lift the siege. The first siege of Vienna was not an Ottoman defeat in the conventional sense. The city was not taken, but the army withdrew largely intact. However, it marked the high water mark of Ottoman expansion into Central Europe. It demonstrated the incredible reach and power of the Ottoman war machine, but also highlighted the logistical limits of campaigning so deep into enemy territory. For Europe, it was a psychological victory, a moment where the seemingly unstoppable Ottoman tide was, for the first time, turned back from the heart of the continent. For the Ottomans, it solidified their control over much of Hungary and initiated a long, drawn-out struggle with the Habsburgs that would define European geopolitics for generations. Suleiman's reign, already marked by such monumental achievements in less than a decade, was a testament to his multifaceted genius. He was a relentless conqueror, securing critical strategic points and expanding the empire's borders to unprecedented levels. But he was also the kanuni, the architect of a legal and administrative system that brought stability, justice, and order to a vast and diverse realm. His patronage of arts, architecture, and culture would transform Istanbul into a dazzling imperial capital, a true centre of the world. He was, in every sense, the magnificent ruler of a golden age, an emperor who not only commanded armies but also crafted laws, fostered culture, and cultivated an image of unparalleled power and prestige. The stage was now set for an empire that had reached its zenith, ready to assert its dominance across land and sea, but also to face the complex internal and external pressures that came with such immense power. The first siege of Vienna in 1529 marked not just a geographical high point for Ottoman expansion into Central Europe, but also a symbolic zenith. Suleiman the Magnificent, now presided over an empire of unparalleled power, wealth, and cultural brilliance. He was a monarch whose writ ran from the gates of Vienna to the sands of Yemen, from the Atlas Mountains to the Caspian Sea. But what happens when an empire reaches such a dizzying height? Does it simply plateau, or do the very forces that propelled it upward begin to subtly shift, creating new pressures and challenges? For Suleiman, the answer was a complex tapestry of continued triumph, profound personal tragedy, and the slow, almost imperceptible emergence of new dynamics that would eventually reshape the empire. His reign was far from over. Indeed, it would continue for another 3.5 decades, a testament to his enduring will and the formidable machinery he commanded. Having asserted dominance over land, Suleiman turned his gaze to the seas, particularly the strategically vital Mediterranean. Europe was still reeling from the shock of Ottoman power, but its maritime strength, particularly that of Spain and the Habsburgs, remained a formidable counterweight. To tip the balance, Suleiman forged an alliance with a figure whose name still evokes dread and admiration: Barbarossa Hayreddin Pasha. This legendary corsair, a master tactician and fearless commander, brought his formidable fleet and unparalleled expertise to the Ottoman cause, becoming the Capudan Pasha, or Grand Admiral, of the Imperial Navy. Under Barbarossa's command, the Ottoman fleet became a terror of the Mediterranean. In 1534, he audaciously captured Tunis, a key North African port, though it was later retaken by a massive Habsburg expedition led by Emperor Charles V himself. This back-and-forth struggle for control of the Barbary coast highlighted the intense naval rivalry. However, Barbarossa's crowning achievement came in 1538 at the Battle of Preveza, where his smaller, more agile Ottoman fleet decisively defeated a colossal Holy League armada commanded by the Genoese Admiral Andrea Doria. Preveza cemented Ottoman naval supremacy in the eastern and central Mediterranean for decades, effectively turning it into an Ottoman lake. The empire could now project its power across vast maritime distances, securing trade routes, protecting pilgrims to Mecca, and launching raids deep into European territories. While the Mediterranean was being secured, Suleiman also continued his relentless campaigns on land. The rivalry with the Shiite Safavid Empire in Persia remained a constant simmering conflict. Suleiman led multiple campaigns against the Safavids, culminating in the capture of Baghdad in 1534, a city of immense historical and symbolic importance, adding another jewel to the Ottoman crown and solidifying Sunni control over one of Islam's holiest cities. These eastern campaigns, though often arduous and costly, further expanded the empire's reach and prestige. Yet beyond military might, Suleiman's era was also a golden age of culture, law, and architecture. He was not merely a conqueror, but a visionary patron of the arts and a meticulous administrator. The epithet Kanuni, or lawgiver, was well earned. Suleiman oversaw a monumental codification of Ottoman law, harmonizing religious Sharia law with secular Kanun law, creating a comprehensive legal framework that brought stability and justice to his diverse empire. This legal synthesis was a testament to the Ottomans' pragmatic approach to governance, ensuring that the vast mosaic of peoples under their rule could find a place within the imperial system. Under Suleiman's patronage, Istanbul blossomed into one of the world's most magnificent cities. The imperial architect, Mimar Sinan, often hailed as the Ottoman Michelangelo, transformed the skyline. His masterpieces, the Suleymaniye Mosque, the Selimiye Mosque, completed under Suleiman's successor but designed by Sinan, numerous bridges, hospitals, and caravanserais were not just feats of engineering, but expressions of a confident, sophisticated civilization. Ottoman miniatures, calligraphy, ceramics, and textiles reached new heights of artistic refinement, blending Islamic, Persian, and Byzantine influences into a uniquely Ottoman aesthetic. This period was without doubt the cultural zenith of the empire, a time when its power was matched by its intellectual and artistic output. However, even as the empire outwardly flourished, the seeds of internal change were being sown, often in the most intimate chambers of the palace. The brutal logic of Ottoman succession, where power often came through fratricide, weighed heavily on the dynasty. Suleiman himself was not immune to its pressures. His deep affection for his Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, a man of immense talent and Suleiman's childhood friend, could not save him when whispers of ambition and perceived disloyalty reached the Sultan's ears. In 1536, Ibrahim, once the most powerful man in the empire after the Sultan, was executed by Suleiman's command, a stark reminder that even the closest bonds could be severed by the demands of imperial power. More devastating still were the succession struggles within his own family. Suleiman had several sons, but the most prominent was Sheikh Mustafa, a popular and capable prince widely expected to succeed his father. Yet Mustafa found himself caught in the treacherous currents of court politics, fueled by the ambitions of Suleiman's formidable consort, Hürrem Sultan, Roxolana, a former Ruthenian slave girl who rose to become Suleiman's legal wife. Hürrem wielded unprecedented influence, maneuvering to ensure the succession of her own sons. Through a combination of genuine concerns about Mustafa's popularity with the Janissaries and perhaps ruthless political calculation, Suleiman was convinced that Mustafa harboured rebellious intentions. In 1553, during a campaign against the Safavids, Mustafa was summoned to his father's tent and, in a tragic scene, strangled by Suleiman's executioners. This act, deeply unpopular with the army and the populace, haunted Suleiman and weakened the line of succession. Later, another of Suleiman's sons, Shehzad Bayezid, also met a similar fate after rebelling against his brother, Selim, and seeking refuge with the Safavids. These tragic episodes underscored the immense personal cost of maintaining power within the Ottoman dynasty. They also highlight the increasing influence of the imperial harem and its powerful women, a phenomenon historians would later term the Sultanate of Women, which would grow in prominence in the coming decades. When Suleiman finally passed away in 1566, on campaign at the siege of Sigetvar, after a reign of 46 years, longer than any other Ottoman sultan, he left behind an empire at its absolute peak. But the world was changing. Europe, though still fragmented, was steadily advancing in military technology, economic organization, and global reach. New World silver was flooding global markets, causing inflation that would eventually impact Ottoman finances. The era of relentless, easy expansion was nearing its end, and the challenges of administering such a vast, diverse, and complex empire were growing. His successor, Selim II, was a departure from the warrior sultans who had preceded him. Known as Selim the Sot by some European chroniclers, he was less inclined to lead armies in person, preferring the comforts of the palace. This shift, while not immediately catastrophic, marked a subtle but significant change in the nature of Ottoman rule. The Sultan, once the dynamic leader on the battlefield, began to withdraw, leaving more power in the hands of the Grand Viziers and the court bureaucracy. Selim II's reign, though brief 1566 to 1574, saw one of the most famous naval battles in history, the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. A Holy League fleet, primarily Spanish and Venetian, inflicted a crushing defeat on the Ottoman navy. Hundreds of Ottoman galleys were sunk or captured, and tens of thousands of sailors and soldiers were lost. For Europe, Lepanto was a monumental victory seen as a divine intervention that shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility at sea. For the Ottomans, it was a severe blow, a profound shock to their naval prestige. Yet it was not the end of Ottoman naval power. With astonishing speed, the empire rebuilt its fleet, demonstrating its immense resources and resilience. Within a year, a new Ottoman fleet was sailing the Mediterranean. However, the strategic initiative in the Western Mediterranean had shifted, and the Ottomans would increasingly focus their naval efforts in the east. Following Selim II, Murad III, 1574 to 1595, inherited an empire still vast and powerful, but one where the internal pressures and external challenges were steadily mounting. The costs of maintaining a massive standing army and a global navy were enormous. Inflation, exacerbated by the influx of New World silver into the global economy, began to erode the purchasing power of Ottoman currency. The Sestimar system, once the backbone of the Ottoman cavalry, began to face difficulties, as its revenues were increasingly diverted to the central treasury or granted to court favourites rather than being used to support soldiers. The Janissaries, once the elite, disciplined shock troops of the empire, also began to change. Their numbers swelled, their discipline sometimes waned, and their involvement in urban life, trade, and even politics increased. The strict devshirme system, which had recruited Christian boys and trained them to be loyal servants of the Sultan, started to become less rigorous, with some Muslim recruits being accepted. These changes, while not immediately disastrous, signalled a gradual erosion of the distinctive qualities that had made the Janissaries such an effective fighting force. The Sultanate of women truly came into its own during this period, with powerful imperial consorts, queen mothers, and daughters of sultans wielding significant influence over policy, appointments, and even succession. Figures like Nurbanu Sultan, Selim II's wife and Murad III's mother, and Safiye Sultan, Murad III's wife, became key political players, navigating the treacherous waters of court intrigue and often dictating the course of imperial affairs from behind the scenes. This era saw a shift in the locus of power, away from the Sultan's direct command and towards the intricate web of familial relationships and patronage networks within the palace. The Ottoman Empire, having reached its acme under Suleiman, was now entering a new phase. The era of relentless expansion was giving way to one of consolidation, adaptation, and increasingly defense. The challenges were no longer merely about conquering new lands, but about managing a vast, complex entity in a rapidly changing world. The foundations laid by Osman, Orhan, Murad, Mehmed, and Suleiman were robust, but even the strongest foundations could be tested by the ceaseless currents of history. How would this magnificent empire, the envy and fear of the world, navigate these new waters? The answer would unfold in the centuries to come, a testament to its enduring strength and its eventual struggles. The Ottoman Empire as we left it stood at an unparalleled height of power and prestige under Suleiman the Magnificent, a golden age of conquest, law, and culture. Yet even as the empire absorbed new territories and refined its institutions, subtle cracks began to appear beneath the gilded surface. By the close of the 16th century, under rulers like Selim II and Murad III, the signs were undeniable. The age of effortless expansion had passed, replaced by a complex tapestry of internal pressures and external threats that would test the very foundations of the magnificent edifice the Ottomans had built. What happens when an empire that has thrived on constant growth suddenly finds its borders hardening? What happens when the very systems designed for efficiency and loyalty begin to fray from within? This is the story of the Ottoman Empire's long, complex transition from its zenith to an era of profound challenge. an era often mislabeled as simple decline, but which in truth reveals the remarkable resilience and adaptive capacity of a state fighting to redefine itself in a rapidly changing world. The most visible internal shift was perhaps the full emergence of what historians call the Sultanate of Women. While women of the imperial harem, like Hurrem Sultan, had always wielded influence, by the late 16th and early 17th centuries their power became more direct, more overt, and often more decisive in shaping imperial policy. With sultans increasingly retreating from active military command and sometimes lacking the political acumen of their predecessors, figures like Safiye Sultan, Murad III's wife and Mehmed III's mother, and later the formidable Kösem Sultan and Turhan Hatit Sultan stepped into the vacuum. These women were not mere consorts, they were political strategists, patrons of vast networks, and sometimes even de facto regents. Safiye Sultan, for instance, famously corresponded with Queen Elizabeth I of England, demonstrating a shrewd understanding of international diplomacy. Kösem Sultan, perhaps the most powerful woman in Ottoman history, served as regent for two of her young sons and actively participated in council meetings, shaping appointments and policies for decades. Her influence was so profound that she effectively ruled the empire through her sons and grandsons, often navigating treacherous court intrigues and power struggles. The impact of the Sultanate of Women was, like much of Ottoman history, a double-edged sword. On one hand, their involvement brought a degree of stability during periods of weak or young sultans, ensuring continuity of governance. They were often astute political players, capable of manoeuvring through the complex currents of the imperial court. On the other hand, their power could also lead to intense factionalism within the palace, as different groups aligned with different women or their protégés vying for access and influence. This often led to instability in appointments, corruption, and a weakening of central authority as various factions pulled in different directions. Beyond the palace walls, the very backbone of the Ottoman military and administrative system began to groan under new pressures. The Timar system, which had for centuries provided the empire with the loyal, disciplined cavalry force by granting land in exchange for military service, started to break down. Inflation, fueled in part by the massive influx of New World silver into the global economy, devalued the fixed revenues of Timar holders, making the system less attractive. Additionally, the increasing reliance on gunpowder weaponry reduced the battlefield dominance of cavalry, leading to a shift towards paid infantry. Many Timar lands were converted into tax farms, a system prone to corruption and less directly tied to military readiness. This shift had a profound impact on the Janissaries, the elite infantry corps that had once been the envy of Europe. Originally recruited through the Devshirme system, which took Christian boys and trained them for absolute loyalty to the Sultan, the Janissaries had become a powerful hereditary force. By the late 16th century, the Devshirme system was largely abandoned, and Janissary ranks were filled by volunteers, often the sons of existing Janissaries or even free Muslims. While this broadened their appeal, it also diluted their unique loyalty and discipline. They became a powerful political force, staging revolts, demanding higher pay, and interfering in succession disputes. No longer just soldiers, they were an urban militia with significant economic and social leverage, often more concerned with their privileges than with military effectiveness. Economically, the empire faced a perfect storm. The global shift in trade routes, with Atlantic powers bypassing the Mediterranean for direct access to Asian markets, slowly eroded the Ottoman Empire's traditional role as a crucial intermediary. While the empire remained wealthy, its relative share of global trade began to diminish. The aforementioned inflation, coupled with increased military expenditures from prolonged wars, strained the imperial treasury. successive sultans resorted to debasing coinage and increasing taxes, further exacerbating economic woes and leading to widespread discontent, sometimes erupting in rural rebellions known as the Salali, revolts in Anatolia. Speaking of prolonged wars, the turn of the 17th century saw the Ottoman Empire locked in costly, protracted conflicts on multiple fronts. The Long War with the Habsburg monarchy, 1593–1606 in Hungary, was a brutal, indecisive struggle that drained both empires. Simultaneously, renewed warfare with the Safavid Empire in Persia, 1603–1618, and later 1623–1639, further stretched Ottoman resources. These wars were no longer the rapid, decisive conquests of Suleiman's era. They were grinding conflicts of attrition, revealing the limitations of an empire struggling to maintain its vast borders against increasingly sophisticated European military technology and persistent Persian ambition. Yet, despite these mounting challenges, the Ottoman Empire was far from a spent force. Its immense size, deeply entrenched institutions, and a remarkable capacity for self-correction allowed it to weather these storms. The mid-17th century, a period often characterized by political instability and military setbacks, also saw the rise of a series of extraordinary Grand Viziers from the Köprülü family. Their tenure, known as the Köprülü era, roughly 1656–1702, represents a powerful testament to the empire's enduring vitality and its ability to find strong leaders even in times of crisis. It was in 1656, amid severe political instability, rebellions, and a disastrous war with Venice, that the aging Albanian statesman Köprülü Mehmed Pasha was appointed Grand Vizier by Turhan Hatice Sultan, the powerful mother of the young Sultan Mehmed IV. He accepted the post on one condition: absolute authority, and he used it. Köprülü Mehmed was a man of iron will and ruthless efficiency. He immediately launched a brutal purge of corrupt officials, rebellious janissaries, and rival factions within the court, executing thousands to restore central authority. He reformed the army, rebuilt the navy, and brought order back to the treasury. His strict measures, while harsh, brought a much-needed period of stability and discipline. He crushed rebellions, pushed back the Venetians, and stabilized the frontier. His son Köprülü Fazıl Ahmed Pasha, who succeeded him in 1661, continued his father's reforms with equal vigour but perhaps more finesse. Fazıl Ahmed was a cultured intellectual as well as a skilled military commander and administrator. He further reformed the tax system, reduced corruption, and oversaw a period of renewed military success. Under his leadership, the Ottomans conquered Crete from the Venetians after a grueling 24-year siege, 1669, and expanded their territory into Polish Ukraine, capturing the fortress of Kamieniec-Podilski and forcing Poland to sign the Treaty of Bucak, 1672. These victories demonstrated that the Ottoman military, when properly led and disciplined, was still a formidable force capable of significant expansion. The Köprülü Grand Viziers, through their decades of service, effectively arrested the immediate decline and provided the empire with a crucial period of respite and resurgence. They demonstrated that the Ottoman system, though facing significant structural challenges, was still capable of producing leaders who could implement effective reforms and achieve military success. They restored a measure of imperial prestige and discipline, proving that the empire was far from collapsing. Yet even their formidable efforts could not fully address the underlying shifts that were slowly but inexorably changing the nature of Ottoman power. The world was evolving. European powers were consolidating, developing new military technologies, and establishing global trading empires that bypassed Ottoman lands. The internal issues of inflation, the changing nature of the military, and the increasing influence of court politics remained simmering beneath the surface. The Köprülü era was a powerful demonstration of Ottoman resilience, a temporary stabilization, but it was not a fundamental reversal of the long-term trends. The empire was no longer just expanding, it was fighting to maintain its vast domains, its internal cohesion, and its place in a world that was rapidly leaving behind the old empires. The stage was set for even greater challenges that would truly test the limits of Ottoman strength and adaptation. The Köprülü era had, against all odds, breathed new life into the ailing Ottoman colossus. For a time, it seemed the empire might defy the gravity of its internal contradictions and external pressures. Ruthless efficiency, restored central authority, and renewed military vigour had seen Crete fall and Venice humbled. But this resurgence, impressive as it was a last magnificent flourish before a definitive turning point. The underlying structural weaknesses, the burgeoning power of consolidating European states, and the sheer scale of the challenges facing the empire were simply too vast for even the most formidable vizier to overcome in the long run. The stage was set for a confrontation that would irrevocably alter the course of Ottoman history, transforming an empire of relentless expansion into one fighting for its very survival. The year was 1683, and the grand ambitions of Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha were about to clash head-on with the formidable might of a unified European defence. Despite the Köprülü legacy of caution, Kara Mustafa, a brother-in-law to the Sultan and a man of immense personal pride and aspiration, harboured a dream that echoed the glories of Suleiman the Magnificent to conquer Vienna. For over a century and a half, the Habsburg capital had stood as a symbolic barrier, the westernmost bastion against Ottoman tide. Its capture would not only secure Central Europe, but, Kara Mustafa believed, might even revive the empire's faltering fortunes and his own prestige. Ignoring the advice of more pragmatic voices, he amassed an army of staggering proportions, reportedly over 150,000 men, a diverse host of Janissaries, Sipahis, Tatars and various auxiliary forces, and marched north. The Second Siege of Vienna commenced in July 1683. The city, though well fortified and defended by a resolute garrison under Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, faced overwhelming odds. Ottoman sappers tirelessly mined the walls, and massive artillery pounded the defences. For weeks, the fate of Central Europe hung in the balance, a tense drama unfolding as the Ottomans slowly choked the city. But this was not the fragmented, squabbling Europe of old. The threat was too great, the symbolism too profound. A Holy League had formed, galvanized by Pope Innocent XI, uniting the Habsburgs with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and various German princes. The decisive moment arrived on September 12, 1683. As the sun rose, a massive relief army led by the brilliant Polish king Jan Sobieski and the formidable imperial commander Charles V of Lorraine descended from the Kahlenberg hills overlooking Vienna. Sobieski's famous winged hussars, their heavy lances and distinctive wings striking terror, spearheaded a charge that shattered the Ottoman lines. The battle was a rout, a catastrophic defeat for the Ottomans, who were caught between the relief army and the desperate sortie from the city. Kara Mustafa Pasha's grand ambition ended in utter failure and humiliation, his tent and the vast Ottoman camp plundered by the victors. He would pay the ultimate price for his hubris, executed by Sultan Mehmed IV's order later that year. The defeat at Vienna was more than just a lost battle. It was a psychological earthquake. It marked the definitive end of Ottoman offensive expansion into Central Europe. For the next 16 years, the empire would be embroiled in the Great Turkish War, 1683 to 1699, a brutal, protracted conflict against the Holy League. The tide had turned, and now it was Europe that pressed the advantage. Austrian forces under commanders like Prince Eugene of Savoy demonstrated superior tactics and organisation, steadily pushing the Ottomans back. Key battles like Mohacs, 1687, a bitter echo of Suleiman's triumph, and particularly Zenta, 1697, where Prince Eugene inflicted a devastating defeat on the Ottoman army, highlighted the growing military disparity. The empire was bleeding men, resources, and territory. The relentless attrition of the Great Turkish War culminated in the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699. This was a watershed moment, arguably the most humiliating peace treaty the Ottomans had ever been forced to sign. For the first time, the empire ceded vast swathes of European territory to its rivals. Hungary and Transylvania, once key Ottoman provinces, were lost to the Habsburgs. Venice gained Morea, the Peloponnese, and parts of Dalmatia. Poland recovered Podolia. Karlowitz was a stark admission of weakness, a clear signal that the era of Ottoman expansion was over, replaced by a desperate struggle to defend what remained. The empire was no longer the terrifying aggressor, but a besieged power, its borders shrinking, its prestige diminished. The shock of Karlowitz reverberated through Istanbul, prompting a slow, often reluctant realization that fundamental change was necessary. The early 18th century, particularly the reign of Ahmed III, 1703 to 1730, witnessed a fascinating, albeit superficial, attempt at cultural and diplomatic rapprochement with the West. This period, known as the Tulip period, Lale Devries in 1730, named for the Ottoman court's obsession with the fashionable flower, was characterized by an era of peace, and a conscious effort to adopt certain aspects of European culture and aesthetics. Under the guidance of Grand Vizier Nevşehirli Damat Ibrahim Pasha, the empire moved away from constant warfare, at least temporarily. Instead, there was a focus on diplomacy, urban development, and cultural exchange. Embassies were established in European capitals, and Ottoman envoys returned with reports of Western advancements, particularly in architecture, gardening, and the arts. Palaces and kiosks in the Rococo Turkish style blossomed along the Bosphorus. Gardens were meticulously cultivated, and the court indulged in extravagant festivals and intellectual pursuits. It was a period of relative calm and artistic flourishing, a deliberate attempt to project an image of sophistication and modernity. Significantly, the first official Ottoman printing press, albeit limited in scope, was established during this time, a belated but crucial step towards disseminating knowledge. However, the Tulip period was ultimately a fragile facade. While it fostered cultural exchange and a new aesthetic, it largely failed to address the deep-seated military and administrative problems that Karlowitz had so brutally exposed. The focus on pleasure and courtly extravagance, coupled with perceived military inaction, alienated conservative elements and the Janissaries, who saw it as a betrayal of traditional Ottoman values and a sign of weakness. The veneer of Europeanization did not extend to the fundamental reforms needed to modernize the military or the state apparatus. This disconnect eventually led to its violent end in 1730 with the Patrona Halil Rebellion, a Janissary-led uprising that deposed Ahmed III and executed Damat Ibrahim Pasha, signalling a conservative backlash against westernizing tendencies. Despite the setback of Patrona Halil, the need for military reform remained undeniable. The 18th century became a century of continuous, often humiliating warfare, primarily against two rising European powers, Russia and Austria. The nascent Russian Empire, under dynamic leaders like Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, steadily expanded southwards, eyeing the Black Sea and the Ottoman territories. While the Ottomans achieved a temporary victory against Peter the Great in the Pruth River campaign of 1711, forcing him to return Azov, this proved to be an anomaly. The long-term trend was clear. Russia was becoming an existential threat. Wars against Austria continued to chip away at the empire's European holdings. The Treaty of Passarowitz 1018, signed during the Tulip period, saw the Ottomans lose further territory to the Habsburgs, including the Banat of Temesvar and northern Serbia, including Belgrade. Though Belgrade was later regained in 1739, these conflicts underscored the empire's defensive posture and its inability to decisively defeat its European rivals. Attempts at military modernization, though limited and often resisted, did occur. French military advisors such as Claude Alexandre de Bonneval, who converted to Islam and became Humbaratja Ahmed Pasha, were brought in to reorganize artillery and engineering corps along European lines. New military schools were established and efforts were made to introduce modern weaponry and tactics. However, these reforms were consistently hampered by the entrenched power of the Janissaries, who saw them as a threat to their privileges and traditional way of life. Their resistance, often manifesting in revolts, meant that real, systemic military transformation remained elusive. The Janissaries, once the vanguard of Ottoman power, had become a reactionary force, an internal obstacle to the very survival of the empire they were sworn to protect. Internally, the 18th century saw the deepening of decentralization. The central authority of the Sultan and the Sublime Porte weakened further as local notables, known as Ayan, gained increasing power and autonomy in the provinces. These powerful landowners and local magnates often collected taxes, maintained their own armed retinues, and sometimes even defied imperial orders, effectively carving out semi-independent fiefdoms. This fractured control over the vast empire further strained its resources and made effective governance and the implementation of reforms incredibly difficult. Economically, the empire continued to grapple with inflation, trade imbalances, and the declining competitiveness of its traditional industries in a rapidly globalizing world. The once mighty Ottoman state, which had dictated terms to Europe for centuries, now found itself fighting a desperate losing battle on multiple fronts: military, economic, and administrative. The sick man of Europe, a moniker that would become painfully familiar, was beginning to show its symptoms, and the great European powers were watching intently, already contemplating its eventual demise.